You know, there's a threat to global security that you won't see on any battlefield. It works from the inside, kind of lurking in the shadows of power. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the world of military corruption.
So let me ask you something. When you think about the biggest threat to a modern military, what pops into your head? Super advanced fighter jets? Some rival superpower? Maybe something like cyber warfare? And look, those are all huge deals for sure. But one of the most destructive forces out there is something else entirely.
Because so often, the thing that does the most damage isn't an enemy on the outside. It's the enemy within. It's like a rot that just weakens the entire structure from the inside out.
And that brings us to corruption's hidden battlefield. We have to understand, this isn't just about some numbers on a spreadsheet or a few stolen dollars. No, this is about lives being put on the line and the security of whole countries.
So what are we really talking about when we say military corruption? Well, at its core, it's pretty simple. It's when someone in a position of power in the defense world abuses that power for their own private gain. And that abuse, it directly attacks two things that are absolutely crucial: how effective a military can be and how much the public actually trusts it.
All right, so how does this kind of corruption actually work? How does it worm its way so deep into the system? Let's break down the anatomy of how these things actually happen.
Okay, so the number one hotspot, the main breeding ground for all this, is military procurement. That's just the fancy word for the process of buying everything a military needs, from boots and uniforms to billion-dollar fighter jets. And when you stop and think about it, it kind of makes sense, right? You've got these massive, eye-watering budgets, incredibly complex technology, and a whole lot of it is wrapped up in national security secrecy. It is literally the perfect storm for shady deals to happen, especially if nobody's really watching closely.
So here's how a classic scheme might play out. Step 1. An official and a contractor get together and make a backroom deal. That almost always leads to step 2. The prices get massively inflated, meaning we, the taxpayers, are paying way more than something is actually worth. Then, the contract doesn't go to the best company. It goes to the one that's in on the deal. And they might even be supplying lower quality gear. The result? Public money just gets torched. And even worse, our soldiers could get stuck with equipment that fails them when their lives depend on it.
But it's not always these complicated schemes. Sometimes it's just straight up theft, embezzlement. We're talking about the direct siphoning of money or resources that were meant for the front lines. And this isn't some abstract accounting problem. This directly hits a military's ability to be ready, leaving them weak and vulnerable when a crisis actually hits.
Now, this whole problem can become baked into the system through something called the revolving door. Picture this. You've got a government official who's in charge of giving out multi-billion-dollar defense contracts. A little while later, they leave that government job, and what do you know? They land a super high-paying executive position at one of the very companies they used to oversee. The potential for a massive conflict of interest there is just, it's off the charts. It creates a system where deals might get made based on who you know, not what's best.
Now, if that wasn't complicated enough, the problem gets even murkier when private companies start showing up on the battlefield itself. This is where the lines between public service and private profit get really, really blurry.
We're talking about private military companies. You'll hear them called PMCs. These are for-profit corporations that get hired to do jobs that, traditionally, were only done by a nation's army. And this trend of outsourcing security, it's growing fast, and the implications are huge. And with that trend, you get some serious risks. I mean, when you start outsourcing military jobs, who's really in charge? Who gets held accountable when something goes horribly wrong? It just waters down responsibility and makes it incredibly difficult for governments to keep an eye on things.
Just look at the difference here. A traditional military, it has a crystal clear chain of command and it's under strict government control. But when you start outsourcing, what you get are these blurred lines of control, really murky legal situations, and a huge, huge challenge when it comes to accountability.
Okay, so this all sounds pretty bleak, I know, but this is not a hopeless fight. Not at all. So let's talk about the path forward, about forging a path to integrity, and look at some of the tools being used to fight this corruption head-on. One of the biggest weapons in this fight is, believe it or not, technology. Just look at the difference between old-school paper-based procurement and modern e-procurement. By moving the whole process online, you bring in transparency and you make everything traceable. Suddenly, every single step can be monitored in real time, which makes it a whole lot harder for someone to rig the system for their own benefit.
But look, technology isn't a silver bullet. You also need really strong governance. We're talking about a whole defense system against corruption. That means having multiple layers of protection, like powerful civilian oversight bodies,
independent auditors, constant anti-corruption training, and, of course, laws that actually have some teeth.
And this can't just be something one country does on its own. The arms trade is global, so the fight against corruption has to be global too. That means countries working together on anti-corruption agreements, aligning their laws, and having a crucial role for outside watchdogs, investigative journalists and nonprofits, to keep the pressure on everyone.
So let's bring this all home. Why does any of this really matter? Because the cost of this kind of corruption, it's not just measured in money. The ultimate price is so much higher.
These are the real-world stakes. When corruption gets its hooks in, national security is compromised. Soldiers are sent into danger with gear that might not work. The public's trust in its own institutions completely crumbles. And the very foundations of democratic government start to weaken. That's the real cost.
So I'll just leave you with this one thought. When a system that's designed to protect all of us is compromised from the inside, when its very integrity is under fire, who really pays the ultimate price? Well, the answer is, we all do. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.